Welcome back to the Mind Body Project. Thanks for taking a little time to join me today. A few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago actually, the Super Bowl, we had the Super Bowl. Everybody watches the Super Bowl. We anticipate the Super Bowl. We wait for it for the commercials, for all the action, just everything that goes on with the Super Bowl. It's just, I'm a big Dallas Cowboys fan. My wife and I are. Of course, they didn't make it. So the Eagles and the Chiefs were in it, and rooting them on, and just amazed at the talent that those men possess at all positions. Just a great game. But watching it, I was thinking about the halftime show and the players and everything that went on during the Super Bowl. And of course, you watch the Super Bowl and have an opinion, and on Monday. And probably now, it used to be on Monday, we'd have to go to work or see others and find out what they thought about it. But now it's instant. It's instant on social media. People are sharing what they liked, what they didn't like about the Super Bowl, what they thought was good, all these different things. And it's almost instant. So you can start seeing people's instant feedback to the Super Bowl. And made me begin to wonder, how often are we influenced by that, by the social media? We see it, we might think, oh, it's good, and then we start seeing, if we're looking on social media, we start seeing the critiques of what happened, and we start going, yeah, that's probably right, yeah, and then we start changing our opinion of what actually happened in the game, what happened in the halftime show, and so again, I began to think about that, and we watch it on TV. Maybe some of us, some went to the game. Of course, it's a big deal. It shows the crowd, and every seat sold out, and it's just a neat thing to go to experience. And but we watch it on TV, so we get to see replays. We get to see, the camera goes to the coaches, to the players, to the sideline, to replays. The commentators talk about it, and all these different things we get to see if we're watching it from TV. Again, it may be a little bit different experience when we're in the stadium and we're watching what's going on. Depending on where your seat's at, you might see a replay or two. Might not hear the commentary saying what happened, what's going on, things like that. So I was thinking about that, and isn't it easy? We all, we hear social media, we hear from our friends. The team should have done this. The halftime show should have been this way. I didn't care for the way she sang. I didn't care for the way they danced. I didn't care for this play that what were they thinking? All these different things that we talk about. And I kind of call that, might call it an armchair coach. I call it maybe an armchair quarterback, because isn't it easy to have all these opinions and be the best when you're sitting in your chair, and you've gotten plenty of time to review the play that just happened, seeing what was going on, what was talked about, how it could have been different. On the screen, there was, they might have drawn arrows and circles, go from here to there to here. All these different things that we get to see from our chair, our couch. We get to see that on TV, and because it's real easy to do that. My kids, when they were little, they played basketball. We called it little dribblers. And it's just a fun time to watch our kiddos play basketball. And we had several different gyms, whether it's at our high school, our intermediate, our elementary school, all had different gyms. Well, there's this one gym at the junior high. And it is, and I just remember it just because it's really a little different than our high school gym, just the elevation and the seating and things like that. But at our junior high, it's an older gym. And so you can sit at the top, and man, you can see the whole court. You can see everything going on. And so when you look down on that, it's easy to say, where my kids should have passed the ball, where they should have, rebounded, where they should have gotten place, all these different things. It's easy to see from when we're on top. But after the game, I'd always go down, and my wife and I, Kim, we'd always go down and we'd congratulate our kiddos, tell them they did a good job. We were proud of them, all these things. And so we'd go down the court. And when we got down on the court, I realized as I looked around that the viewpoint and perspective is different when you're on the court. It's easy. When I was up high, I could see everything going on. It was very interesting what I could see. But then when I got down on the court, all I could see was the court. And sometimes if there's other players, their parents were congratulating them, and it was a different way of looking at it. When I saw the other players and their parents, I noticed them differently than I did at the top of the stands. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today is being an armchair quarterback. And we may know some armchair quarterbacks. We might want to call them armchair coaches. But when the perspective changes, then the choices we make change. It's real easy using the basketball, my kiddos' basketball analogy. It's real easy when we're sitting on the top of the bleachers, and there's other people on the court of life. It's easy for us to look down and think of what they could do, what they should do. And, there's different types of what I call armchair quarterbacks. You might call them armchair coaches. Because quarterbacks, the same thing coaches, depending on what they're coaching, they're going to call a play. The quarterback is going to enforce that play. He's going to tell the rest of the team that play. There's different types of armchair, or I'm just going to call them armchair quarterbacks. Because again, if you're in the armchair, you get to see it all. You get to see the replays. You get to sit back. You get to watch this happen. You get to watch that play out. You get to see it all. And so one of the types of armchair quarterbacks, and if you haven't experienced this, have you ever been an armchair quarterback? If you haven't ever received the words from an armchair quarterback, maybe you have been an armchair quarterback and didn't realize it. First one is, has anybody ever said this to you? Is what you ought to do. I don't know about you, but I've heard that a lot. And hey, I've been guilty of it. I've had to, from time to time, been the one to say, hey, is what you ought to do. And isn't that so easy to do, is to say, to be up in the stands and looking down and you're not on their court of life. But you can say, it's what you ought to do. Well, that's easy to say. That's very easy to say. But to do is completely different. Because you see it from your perspective, and you may be able to see some other things going on that they don't. But when they're down there on their court of life, or when we are down there on our court of life, it's hard to see around all the obstacles, all the other players, all the other people, all the other things going on, all the commotion going on, and we can't see what we ought to do. How about this one? How about this armchair quarterback? If I was you, I would, whatever that is. If I was you. If you were me, you'd be down here on the court and not standing up there, and you probably might be in the same position. It's very easy to say, if I was you, I would do this, because we're looking at it from a different perspective. We're looking at it from higher up, or we're looking at the replay, and we're talking about now. We're seeing how it plays out, or how it potentially could play out, because we have a different perspective. We have a different viewpoint. And what about this one? What about the armchair quarterback that says you should have blah blah blah? Well, it's easy to look in retrospect. I think we could all look in retrospect, look back at our life, and there's a lot of things that we could say, well, I should have done this, or this, because I think that's part of learning, that's part of growing. And sometimes, somebody, the armchair quarterback that's trying to give us advice and say, you should have, maybe a little older, maybe have had some more experiences than we had at that current moment. I think as all parents, my wife and I, Kim, we have 4 kids. And I think as all parents, we think we could do better. As we get older, and I've noticed this as I get older, that I could have been a better dad. And Kim says the same thing. I could have been a better mom. And because at the time we look back and we see how we could have done things differently. But I think at the time too, we're doing the best we can with the knowledge that we have. It's so easy to look back and realize maybe some areas you could have improved on, not necessarily mistakes, but areas you could have improved on. And you look back at that and go, I could have improved on that. And I think that sometimes makes us say as mom and dads, I should have been a better mom and dad. No, we were good. We were just doing the best we could with the knowledge that we had. And as we get older, we learn more, we have more wisdom. And so it's easier to reflect and say, I should have. And so sometimes I think those armchair quarterbacks are further along in life or have been through other experiences. So it's easy for them to say you should have after the fact, after looking back in retrospect. And what about this one? This one's just kind of, this armchair quarterback is just kind of out there and kind of just telling us how it is. What in the world were you thinking? That was so dumb. I mean, now talk about a gut punch when somebody says, what if I was to tell one of my kids that, they're all adults now, what in the world were you thinking? That's so dumb. Instead of taking time and maybe share some lessons with them that could be extracted from that, just saying, what were you thinking? You goofball. So we all have those, I think, armchair quarterbacks through our lives. We've all had those in our life. And maybe, if you haven't, maybe you have been an armchair quarterback. I know that's the case for me. There's been times when I've been an armchair quarterback, especially training clients. Sometimes I say, you should have, or is what you ought to do, is that. And then when sometimes I talk to them and they explain why they did what they did, whether it's exercise, food, we have friends that do those things, and we say, and once they explain, then we begin to have a different perspective, whether it's our kiddos, whether it's our friends, whether it's our family. I think we all, at times, start out as an armchair quarterback. We're trying to fix the problem only because we're looking at it from a different perspective. The halftime show, going back to the Superbowl, the halftime show was Rihanna. And, there's a lot of different thoughts on the halftime show, comparing this year to the last year and previous years. And, everybody has an opinion. That's what's great. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. But as I looked at it, I thought about the dancers and her singing. And I thought, regardless of whether you thought it was a good performance, a bad performance, what were they wearing? Was it goofy? Was it great? It doesn't matter. As I looked at it, I thought, wow, they have practiced and practiced and practiced, because their moves were flawless. They were in sync. They were just amazing how they would all dance the same way. They were in groove, in motion. It was just amazing to me, whether or not, what they're wearing, how that was singing, how they were dancing. It was all, I looked at it and go, there is so much practice that has gone on prior to this 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't even really know how long it was, but it shows to me again that all the practice, everything that goes behind the scenes to make that happen, but yet we are quick to, from our point of view, from our perspective, critique the dancing, the singing. We're quick to do that when we don't even know how much time, energy, and effort went into that 10 or 15 minutes. But we sure are critical of that 10 or 15 minutes. Are many of us willing to put in that amount of time to get out in front of millions of people to dance and sing? Maybe some are, but I would say that a majority are not. They're intimidated. They're, what are people going to say? All these different things that come about when, we try to think about putting ourselves out there in the court of life, because of course we all had a different perspective. The camera's going around, halftime, all these different things. But the singer and dancer, they were right where they were. That's what they saw. We saw, if the halftime show, we saw all the dancers, the camera would pan out, pan in. But really most of those dancers saw was maybe the dancer or two or three next to them. That's all they saw. They didn't see the big picture. So we just have a different perspective. So it's super easy to be a critic, an armchair quarterback, when we have a different perspective, and it's different than the one that is on the court of life. So how do we, we become aware of those armchair quarterbacks, whether we're one, whether somebody is one to us. We become aware of that. How do we respond to that without getting? Because what happens when somebody says, "Well, is what you ought to do," and then we get all huffy? Well, I'm not, going to do that. Or if they say, "If I was you, I would have," and we sometimes might say, "Well, you're not me, so go fry an egg," or whatever it is. Or they say, "You should have," and then we might come back and say, "Well, I didn't, so what about it?" And sometimes those can turn into a negative situation. So how can we turn those how can we respond to those armchair quarterbacks in a positive manner, in a way that that doesn't cause conflict or a negative situation? One might be, "Thank you for your feedback. I'll take that in consideration." Because, is what you ought to have done, and you may have gone through the situation and look back. There's a lot of situations, that I look back and I can reflect and I can say, "Oh yeah, I should have done that a little bit differently." The interesting thing, my dad, growing up, neat thing about my dad is he doesn't give advice unless you ask him for it. And he'll listen, and he'll and he'll say some words, but real advice he won't give unless if I come up to him and say, "Dad, I need some advice. What do you think?" He'll tell me. It's been that way as long as I can remember. Of course, in high school and junior high, of course, he gave me advice. But as an adult, he's done the same with my brothers and my sister. He doesn't give advice unless we ask for it. And so growing up, I remember in whether it's junior high or high school, there'd be times, and I'm sure some of you are like this. Dad tells me something, and I go, yeah, Dad doesn't know. And later down the road, turns out, I guess Dad was right. And that happened to me a lot. That even happened, I asked my dad for advice, even as an adult. In my late 20s, I asked my dad for some advice. He gave it to me. I didn't didn't listen to him. And, later down the road, I was like, looks like Dad was right. And so, I think sometimes we're slow learners. It took me a little while to learn that when I ask Dad his advice, usually, most always he's right. So I take that into consideration. And when, knowing when I ask for advice that is going to be the right advice. And so, because again, I'm coming from asking for advice based on his wisdom, his knowledge, his past experiences in life. So, because it's easy to, again, say is what you should have done is what you ought to do. It's easy when you've had those experiences, and so I use my dad as that measuring of what should I do, and so I take that in consideration. And another way we can respond to the armchair quarterbacks, and is that explain to me what it looks like from your perspective, because again, we only have if we're using my kiddos on the court playing basketball when they're little. They only have one perspective. One, they were short. They're short because they're kiddos, and so it's a little different than when you're taller. Than if you're an NBA star, you can still see a little bit more just because of height. And their perspective is different. than mine. So if I was hollering at them, and I was never really a holler at basketball games, any kind of games. The joke was that I'd always fall asleep everywhere. I had fallen asleep at basketball games, baseball games, soccer games, softball games, baseball games, any kind of game. There's a high probability that I have fallen asleep. I did perfect the art of sunglasses on, sound asleep, and head was straight up, and I never bobbled. That is an art. But if some of the times that I was awake, I was awake a lot, but I was also asleep a lot too. But anyhow, I sit and I get tired, so I close my eyes and I take a little nap. And sometimes Kim would have to poke me if I, might snore, kind of grunt, but she'd poke me and I'd wake up. So my kids always knew that. They'd always ask me after the game, "Did you see that, Dad, or were you sleeping?" Because I always knew that. I really tried to stay awake. It's not that I just wanted to sleep all the time, but I just got comfy and I'd go sleep. So, but I still wasn't a holler. I didn't, I'd root them on, but it wasn't like, "Oh, you should do this. You should, pass to that person. Do this, do that." I didn't do that. So, after the game, I might go down and ask them, what did they think? How did they see the game? Because they have a different perspective on the court than I do. So before I start saying, well, it's what you should have done, is what you ought to do. If I was you, I would have. Let me first see what are they seeing. And same is true as the armchair quarterback, whether you are being or you're receiving that is. And if somebody says that to you, then ask, hey, explain to me your point. Your point of view, your perspective. How did you see it happening? How did you see it going on? Because maybe, and again, that's a different perspective that we can learn from, a different point of view that we can learn from. And when we learn from something, we can grow. And we can grow into new things. And when we grow like that, then there's other things that, we might have an armchair quarterback come and tell us, hey, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. And then you ask again, hey, what did you see from your viewpoint? What was your perspective? And then we grow some more, and we grow some more, and we grow into that knowledge and wisdom. So before we critique, before we decide to be that armchair quarterback, I challenge each of us to remember that it looks different in the nosebleeds than it does out on the court of life or the field of life. Whatever playing space we're in, it just looks different than if we're back up in the nosebleed section looking things down. It's just way different. And I think each of you would agree as you think about different situations in your life and you think back over your life about, in retrospect now, looking back, you can say, oh yeah, I can see where I need to do that, should have done that. But in that moment, you can't see those things. And so remember that before you try to be an armchair quarterback to someone else. That the perspective and the point of view is different at each different place. Of course, the coach has a different sounds, different view than the players do, because the coach is getting all this information over his headset. The quarterback is. So there's just different inputs coming in. And so it causes us to have different outcomes, different decisions that we make. And again, my question to you is: are you an armchair quarterback to other people, or are you receiving that armchair quarterback? And I think sometimes through life we find ourselves at one place or the other. And so we can be on both sides of that sometimes, but the goal is to remember whether you're trying to be one or you're receiving it. How we need to proceed with that and what we need to remember. Because it's just, we've all received it and we've all given it. But there's no perfect answer. It's life. Just like on the court in basketball, as my kiddos played, there's tons of different plays. The coach calls one play, we look and say, why did coach shouldn't have called that, should have done this. We all have opinions. We all should have done this, should have done that. And all those come from our experience. As we get older, we have more experiences, we have more knowledge, we have more wisdom. Wisdom is really putting that knowledge to use in a way that will benefit our life. And which is my challenge to each of us, is to use that knowledge and wisdom, whether it comes from a armchair quarterback. Find out what their point of view is, and maybe it changes your perspective. It changes your point of view and helps you grow and learn for the next situation. Because each situation we have in life prepares us for the next one and the next one. And sometimes, we think we have a big event in our life, and it's just preparing us sometimes for a bigger event. So the best thing we can do is just learn from that. And how can we do better next time? How can we be better? And part of that is finding out all we can from other people that are in our lives and are sharing our life with us, that we can just grow and become better people. So thank you very much for taking a little time and joining me today. Again, I would love to connect with you. You can go to aarondegler.com. You can find this podcast. You can find, I have a great podcast about my hometown. It's called My Hometown. It's about my hometown of Bowie, Texas. And it's just a fun podcast that I share, that I get to talk with business owners and community members and city officials, and just a fun time to share my community with the world, along with my community. So you can go to aarondegler.com. You can get both the podcasts. You can find them there. You can connect with me, whether it's signing up for my weekly email that I send out. Have a daily text that I send out. You can sign up for it there. So there's a bunch of things. If you're looking for one-on-one coaching or training, that's the place to go to connect with me. And I'd love for you to reach out. Of course, I would love for you to share and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube. The best way we can grow is by sharing and subscribing and telling everyone about the Mind Body Project. So again, I appreciate you stopping by, taking a little time to join me today. And hey, we'll see y'all next time. As I tell my wife Kim every night before I go to bed, it's Bomb of the Ninth, AA, out.